Okay, welcome to the next video in our structure and function of the cardiovascular system lesson. In this video, I'm going to take you through the arterial compartment, some of the special characteristics of that compartment that may come in handy for you to know. So just as a basic introduction, this is your arterial compartment here, right? Big muscular vessels, lots of high pressure. The arterial compartment has a number of unique functions. One is you create an elevated pressure head that brings about continuous perfusion of tissue. So blood is flowing from high pressure to low pressure. You want that flow through the beds to be relatively constant, and we'll talk about how that happens, how the arterial compartment functions to help that. We have containment and transport of blood, the conduit function, you carry blood to the microcirculation, kind of obvious. Regulation of resistance to flow, that is a really, really big function of arteries, okay? Particularly the arterioles regulate resistance to flow through the cardiovascular system, all right? So I talk about function one, maintaining a constant pressure. Your arteries, particularly your aorta and the larger arteries, do this through what's called hydraulic filtering, okay? Here's the problem, it's not a problem, it's just a fact with the arteries. Well, the heart is shoving a whole bunch of blood into your arteries. Your aorta is receiving 5 liters per minute. The entire stroke volume, whatever it is received in 300 milliseconds in this artery. So what happens is this artery expands, okay, and the walls stretch, okay, and so the arteries can receive the entire volume of blood, and they get bigger, and you can actually feel that when you take a pulse. The larger arteries expand, and you can feel the artery expand, okay, and the pressure goes up in the arteries. So you get this expansion of the walls. And then what happens, the heart enters diastole, your aortic valve closes, right? So blood can't get back this way. And it's flowing to the capillaries. And your capillaries really don't want to see big pulses of flow. That you don't want flow going up real high and then down real low, and up real high and down low, real low in your capillaries. You want a nice, steady, even flow, okay? Well, because the walls of the arteries are expanded and expansible, what happens is you get what's called an elastic recoil. That is, the walls generally just sort of tend to return to shape, and as they do that, they exert pressure on the fluid. So instead of getting this huge increase in pressure, then a big decrease, you get the arteries that will expand, the aortic valve closes, and then they gradually return to shape. And as they gradually return to shape, they maintain what's called a pressure head. That is, the capillaries see a much more constant pressure than they would otherwise. They don't see a big increase and a big decrease. The arteries receive all that blood, the walls stretch, and then they gradually return back to shape. And as they return back to shape, they always want to return back to shape. The walls always want to compress and turn back to shape. And as that happens gradually, you maintain more of a constant pressure. It isn't completely constant, obvious. It goes up and down. It's 120/80. But it isn't, some really big high number and then some really low number. The reason why that variability isn't any bigger than it is because of the elastic recoil and this hydraulic filtering function of the larger arteries in the aorta. So as I said, you still get changes in pressure. You go from 80 to 120 and down again in your arteries, and that's because you're shoving blood into the aorta. As the blood gets shoved in, the pressure goes up, right? So we characterize the pressure in the arteries through a term that we call mean arterial pressure, okay? Now usually when I say the mean pressure, you guys mean, well, it's the point that's directly in between. So, if I were to ask you to calculate it and you were a normal person, you'd go, peak's 120, the minimum's 80, so the mean is 120 plus 80 divided by 2, it should be 100, right? Well, that's what a normal person would do. You're a medical student. I've told you before, you're not allowed to be normal anymore. And in fact, What we mean by mean arterial pressure is something different. We mean the mean over time. And the reason why this matters physiologically, the reason why it's not calculated the way that you might assume that it would be, is because what you're really talking about with the mean arterial pressure is what your baroreceptors see in your carotid artery. So your baroreceptors are in charge of detecting pressure in your system. And they send signals to your brain that say the pressure is really low, you got to do something about this, or the pressure is really high, you got to do something about this, okay? So they're monitoring pressure. Well, your baroreceptors, the cells in your baroreceptors, they aren't real smart, okay? They can't just pick out the peak and then pick out the minimum, send it to the nucleus, and divide by 2 like you might do in your brain, okay? They're stupid, they don't have a brain. So what they do is they continuously monitor pressure over time, and their output is proportional to what they see over time. Well, here's the problem. You only spend about 1/3 of your time near this peak. You spend about 2/3 of your time as this gradual decrease takes place near the diastolic pressure of 80. So your cells in your baroreceptors see pressures close to 80 a lot more over much more time than they see pressures over near 120, okay? So the output that they put out is going to be proportional to a pressure that's closer to 80 than it is to 120. And in fact, it's about 93 normally. Because you spend 2/3 of your time closer to 80, your mean will be closer to 80, okay? The way to calculate this is one way to do it. There are multiple ways. You can use any equation you want. Some people will take 2 times the diastolic plus the systolic and divide that sum by 3. This is another way to do it. You take the diastolic pressure at 80. You add the systolic minus the diastolic, the difference between the two, and you divide that by 3. You get the same number. Okay? It doesn't matter which way you do it, all right? And that number, normally, if your pressure is 120 over 80, will be 93, okay? So once again, the mean arterial pressure is what you need to know if you want to know what the flow is through the system, or more accurately, your body is really monitoring the mean arterial pressure. It's changing the stroke volume, heart rate, and total peripheral resistance to regulate that pressure, okay? So I've stated this before, but this is why the MAP is important, and this is why recognizing what it is important. This is detected by your baroreceptors. What your baroreceptors output will be proportional to what this is, and then the response that you get of your system will be proportional to what this is, because the whole system is geared towards saying the MAP is low, your baroreceptors say the MAP is low, they output something proportional, a pulse frequency that's proportional to that mean arterial pressure. Your brain will say, oh, that means it's low, I better do something about it, and it will bring that mean arterial pressure back up toward normal based upon what it sees. But what it sees is the mean arterial pressure, that's this mean, all right? All right. So, if we want to know what changes mean arterial pressure, I said stroke volume, heart rate, total peripheral resistance. This is what we call a statement of causality in the cardiovascular system. That is, changes in cardiac output and total peripheral resistance cause a change in mean arterial pressure. Changes in heart rate times stroke volume change cardiac output, which cause a change in mean arterial pressure. This is what your system cares about. So we say that changes on the left cause a change in the right. Okay, that is what we mean by a statement of causality. These are not statements of causality. They are mathematically true. If you know the mean arterial pressure and the cardiac output, you can calculate total peripheral resistance. But it's important for you to recognize that your body doesn't really care about total peripheral resistance. It changes total peripheral resistance in order to regulate mean arterial pressure. So this is not a statement of causality. It is a mathematically true statement, But as far as your body is concerned, all it cares about is mean arterial pressure. And it cares about changing these things to get the mean arterial pressure where it wants it to be. This is a statement of causality. This is not. Your body alters heart rate and stroke volume to bring cardiac output up. It does not alter cardiac output to get a given heart rate. It doesn't care about heart rate. All it cares about really is mean arterial pressure. So these are not statements of causality. These are, okay? As far as your body is concerned, these are. You change this, this, and this. You do not change the mean arterial pressure to, for instance, say, okay, I want a cardiac output of 5, so I'll change the mean arterial pressure to make it 5. You don't do that. You change these two to make this what you want. And in order to make this what you want, you change these two to alter this. These are statements of causality as far as your system is concerned. If you want an increase in mean arterial pressure, you will increase stroke volume and or increase heart rate and or increase TPR. An increase in any of these will increase mean arterial pressure. A decrease in any of these will decrease mean arterial pressure. Okay? All right. And I've sort of said this to you before. I gave you another graph which demonstrated it. These are all large arteries. Thoracic aorta is, your blood flows through the thoracic aorta into the abdominal aorta, from the abdominal aorta into the femoral artery. These are all large arteries. The resistance to flow is pretty low in large arteries. Remember, the resistance gets really big in the arterioles. This is upstream of that. So you will notice that the mean pressure here, which is this line, which is kind of high in this diagram, doesn't change much as you go down this arterial tree, because the resistance to flow is relatively low until you hit those arterioles. And then the resistance to flow goes high and you see this pressure drop. Okay? But if you measure the pressure in the femoral artery, it's basically going to be the same pressure as what's in the aorta. It is, in fact, lower because blood is flowing from here into here, so you know qualitatively it must be lower, but it's not much lower. In terms of your measurement, it's basically going to be the same, okay? Because you're not going to be able to detect the difference. All right, that's all I've got on the arterial compartment. Thank you for your attention, and we will continue on with this lesson with the next video.